The Assyrians were an ancient people of Upper Mesopotamia who established one of the world's first empires. Today, they are known for their military prowess, advanced administrative system, monumental architecture, and rich artwork. In this video, we will delve into the history and culture of this remarkable civilization and explore how the Assyrians shaped the ancient world. The Near East has long been regarded as the cradle of civilization. It was in this region, particularly in the area known as the Fertile Crescent, that agriculture first emerged around 11,000 BC. From there, it gradually spread to neighboring areas, including the Nile Valley. In Egypt, conditions for agriculture were especially favorable, as the Nile River flooded predictably every late summer, enabling farmers to prepare their fields and plant crops once the waters receded. In the region of Mesopotamia, however, agriculture was much more difficult. Although the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, fed by rainfall from the Taurus mountains, carried nutrient-rich silt that nourished the land, their flooding often occurred in late spring, just as crops were maturing, posing a significant threat to the harvests. Despite these challenges, around 7200 BC, communities in Upper Mesopotamia began migrating southward and developing increasingly sophisticated irrigation systems. Over the next 2 millennia, they managed to control the flow of the two rivers and effectively irrigate new fields by constructing canals, levees, and dikes. Thanks to this and the region's naturally fertile soil, southern Mesopotamia soon became a thriving agricultural hub. Numerous farming villages and towns were gradually established throughout the region, laying the foundation for more complex forms of settlement. It was in southern Mesopotamia during the 4th millennium BC that the first cities in history emerged. These cities were established by the Sumerians, widely regarded as the world's earliest known civilization. The Sumerians developed a distinct language, sophisticated religious traditions, and independent city-states that sometimes cooperated but often competed for power and resources. Among their most remarkable achievements was the invention of writing. They created a logosyllabic script characterized by wedge-shaped marks, which we now call cuneiform. To the east of Mesopotamia lay the Zagros Mountains. In the southern part was Elam, an advanced civilization with notable similarities to the Sumerians, while the northern areas were inhabited by tribal societies, the most well-known of which were the Gutians. Surrounding the Sumerians to the north, west, and south were various Semitic-speaking peoples, among whom the inhabitants of Eckart were the most prominent. The Akkadians eventually adopted many aspects of Sumerian culture, including their religion, their writing system, and administrative practices. Over time, increasing numbers of Akkadians migrated into the cities of northern Sumer, where they established communities. Between 2700 to 2600 BC, the town of Ashur was founded on the banks of the Tigris River. This modest settlement of tents and mud huts marks the beginning of Assyrian history. In contrast to the alluvial plains and marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, the terrain around Ashur consisted of rocky hills and small plateaus. To the east rose the Zagros Mountains, to the north lay the foothills of the Taurus Mountains, and to the west stretched the Syrian desert. Strategically positioned on a river ford, Ashur was both easily defensible and well connected. Due to its lower levels of precipitation compared to other areas in the Fertile Crescent, agriculture in Ashur was practiced but not heavily relied upon. Instead, from early on, the inhabitants of Ashur tended to trade as a primary means of livelihood. The city's location made it a vital crossroads linking the southern Mesopotamian plain with Anatolia, the Iranian plateau, and the eastern Mediterranean. This advantage helped Ashur grow from a small settlement into a rich town as trade expanded and people settled there in increasing numbers. The early Assyrian period is the least well documented. However, there are a few important archaeological discoveries that offer valuable insight into this era. Among the earliest is a temple dedicated to the Akkadian goddess Ishtar, known to the Sumerians as Inanna, dating to around 2400 BC. Excavations at the site have revealed clay incense burners, model house altars, and votive figures of worshippers, all of which closely resemble similar artifacts from contemporary Sumerian culture. During this period, a new cult emerged centered on the god Ashur, who personified the city that bore his name. Over time, Ashur would become the supreme deity of the Assyrian people. In the late 24th century BC, Sargon of Akkad established the world's first empire, bringing much of Mesopotamia, including the city of Ashur, under his rule. Akkadian increasingly replaced Sumerian as the primary language for daily use and writing, though Sumerian retained its role in religious and ceremonial contexts. The Akkadian Empire eventually collapsed under pressure from the Gutians, who overran southern Mesopotamia and ruled for about a century. In 2112 BC, the Sumerian ruler Ur-Nammu founded the third dynasty of Ur, overthrowing the Gutians and establishing his own state. In the following decades, a new people appeared on the scene. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking semi-nomadic group originating from the Syrian desert. Initially, small bands of Amorites settled near the borders of Mesopotamia. Over time, their presence expanded and they increasingly engaged in raiding and plundering. Eventually, waves of Amorites, together with the Elamites from the east, overwhelmed the Sumerian Empire and seized most of its territory. The Amorites established their own states and dynasties throughout Mesopotamia, adopting elements of Akkadian and Sumerian culture, particularly in religion and administration. Around 2025 BC, a hereditary dynasty was founded in Ashur by Ashur I. Its members did not refer to themselves as kings. Instead, they adopted the title of Steward of Ashur, which was centered on the belief that the god Ashur was the true sovereign and human rulers merely his representatives. Ashur operated under a mixed constitutional system where authority was shared among the steward, the alum, the city assembly composed of the citizens, and the city hall, managed by annually appointed officials known as limum, who were typically drawn from elite merchant families. Notably, there were no palaces. Civic life centered around public spaces. As we mentioned, most citizens were merchants involved in long-distance trade. This extensive trade network dealt in a wide range of goods. Tin from the Zagros Mountains in Central Asia, lapis lazuli from the Indus Valley, copper from Anatolia and Cyprus, timber from the Levant, gold and silver from Anatolia, and textiles from Mesopotamia. A key center in this network was Kanesh, a major trading city in central Anatolia. There, Assyrian merchant families who had established themselves locally operated semi-independently under local laws and treaties. Toward the end of the 19th century BC, an ambitious Amorite man of Babylonian royal descent named Shamshi-Adad assembled an army and conquered the city of Ekalatum. Soon after, he took control of Ashur, deposing its ruler Erishum II. He assumed the traditional Assyrian title, Steward of Ashur. Shamshi-Adad expanded his territory westward and conquered Mari, creating a powerful kingdom in Upper Mesopotamia. He styled himself with grand titles such as King of the Universe and Pacifier of the land between Tigris and Euphrates. Although Ashur lost its political independence, it was an important religious center within the state. Shamshi-Adad undertook major construction projects, including the rebuilding of the Temple of Ashur and the erection of temples to other gods, as well as the large ziggurat. In the south, the city of Babylon emerged as a major power under the leadership of Hammurabi, known today for his influential legal code. Hammurabi transformed Babylon into a dominant political, intellectual, and military force, unifying Mesopotamia under his rule and making Ashur a vassal state. However, after Hammurabi, the empire entered a long period of decline, weakened by internal strife, ineffective successors, and widespread rebellion. In the aftermath, the city of Ashur regained its independence, re-established its local government, destroyed the palace built by Shamshi-Adad, and returned to its traditional focus on commerce. Between the 17th and 14th centuries BC, the rise of the Hittite Empire and the Mitanni Kingdom triggered a series of wars in Anatolia and Upper Mesopotamia, ultimately leading to the collapse of the Assyrian trading colonies. During this period, Ashur underwent intermittent phases of vassalage. These pressures and changes prompted a fundamental transformation. Ashur evolved from a trade-focused city-state with a mixed constitution into a centralized, militarized kingdom that also encompassed the cities of Nineveh and Arbela. Thus, the Assyrian civilization proper began, solidifying in the heartland known as Mat Ashur, the land of the god Ashur, a name later Hellenized as Assyria. The first proper king of Assyria was Ashur-uballit I, who rose to power in 1363 BC. Taking advantage of Hittite pressure on the Mitanni kingdom, he rebelled and established Assyria as an independent kingdom. Ashur-uballit sought diplomatic ties with Babylonia and married his daughter Mubalitat-Sherua to the Kassite king Burnaburiash II. At that time, Assyria was culturally underdeveloped compared to Babylonia, which had inherited the intellectual traditions of the Sumerians and Akkadians. Ashur-uballit adopted elements of Babylonian culture, using both Old Assyrian and Old Babylonian in administration, employing Sumerian for religious purposes, and even building a temple to the Babylonian god Marduk in Ashur. It was under his reign that Assyria underwent the final transformation into a centralized monarchy. A royal palace was constructed, replacing older civic institutions, and the king's authority grew stronger, marginalizing the city assembly in favor of officials who owed their positions to royal patronage and land grants. Furthermore, a formal royal court took shape, which included eunuchs and the king's harem. Palace life was tightly regulated by royal decrees, and the king's status was symbolically emphasized through ceremonies which promoted conquest. Assyrians now fully embraced militarism, unsettling neighboring powers that viewed the rise of the Assyrian Empire with great alarm. About 30 years after Ashur-uballit came to power, the Babylonian king died. His son Kara-Indash, born of the Assyrian princess, ascended the throne. However, an anti-Assyrian coup soon claimed the lives of both Kara-Indash and his mother. To avenge his daughter and grandson, Ashur-uballit invaded Babylon, killed the conspirators, and installed Kurigalzu II on the throne. But Kurigalzu soon turned against Assyria, launching attacks on its cities. A prolonged conflict between Assyria and Babylonia ensued, continuing under Ashur-uballit's successors Enlil-nirari and Arik-den-iri. In the early 13th century BC, the Assyrians campaigned westward to the Kabul River region, where kings like Adad-nirari and Shalmaneser subdued the declining Mitanni state, annexed territories, and deported populations to weaken resistance. Tukulti-Ninurta, the most famous king of the Middle Assyrian period, ascended the throne in 1243 BC and reigned for nearly 40 years. He was the first ruler to call himself King of Kings. His reign was characterized by aggressive military campaigns and ambitious territorial expansion. He first extended Assyrian control westward into contested frontier regions before turning his attention southward toward Babylonia. Conflict with Babylon intensified when its king, Kashtilias IV, allegedly violated a sacred treaty. In response, Tukulti-Ninurta launched a decisive military campaign, culminating in the capture of Kashtilias and the widespread destruction of Babylonian cities. Declaring dominion over southern Mesopotamia, he installed client rulers in Babylon, though his authority there remained tenuous. He then exploited Babylonia's resources to fund grand construction projects, including the founding of a new capital, Kar Tukulti-Ninurta, which means Fortress of Tukulti-Ninurta. Despite his early successes, the latter part of his rule was marred by growing unrest. his costly building endeavors and his controversial sacking of the revered temple of Marduk in Babylon fueled resentment among the Assyrian elite. This discontent ultimately led to his downfall. Overthrown in a coup led by his own son, Tukulti-Ninurta was imprisoned and eventually killed in the very city that bore his name, which was abandoned soon after his death. Following the reign of Tukulti-Ninurta, Assyria entered a turbulent era marked by internal decline and mounting external pressures. His successors struggled to preserve his legacy, and the kingdom gradually diminished in both power and influence. Two specific rulers, Tiglath-pileser I and his son Ashurbanipal, briefly reversed this trend. Tiglath-pileser I in particular achieved a series of notable victories. He crossed the Euphrates and received tribute from prominent coastal cities such as Sidon and Byblos. Yet these successes proved short-lived. Despite their efforts, the kingdom faced increasing threats from the Arameans, a Semitic-speaking tribal people originating in what is now Syria. Their use of elusive guerrilla tactics disrupted Assyrian control, devastated towns and cities, and accelerated the empire's decline. By the time of Ashurbanipal I in the 11th century BC, Assyria had been significantly weakened, with much of its territory lost. Meanwhile, the Arameans, alongside the Chaldeans, another Semitic group, also invaded Babylonia, contributing to the widespread destabilization of Mesopotamia. These invasions occurred as part of a broader regional crisis known as the Bronze Age collapse, a period around the 12th century BC when many powerful states across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East were destroyed. The collapse was partly driven by shifting climate patterns that caused prolonged droughts and food shortages, which in turn triggered mass migrations and waves of invasions. The main invading forces were the Sea Peoples, whose raids devastated cities from Greece and Anatolia to the Levant. Palace-centered kingdoms such as the Hittites and Mycenaeans collapsed entirely. Egypt managed to survive a major confrontation with the Sea Peoples under Ramses III, but emerged significantly weakened, having lost much of its overseas influence. Assyria initially weathered the crisis better than many of its contemporaries. While other powers were completely destroyed, Assyria maintained relative stability and even benefited briefly from the regional disarray. However, as we mentioned, by the 11th century BC, waves of Aramean tribes overrun the Assyrian countryside, bringing instability and economic disruption. Yet, despite these pressures, Assyria retained a thread of political continuity. Its ruling dynasty endured, and the sacred city of Ashur remained intact. By the mid-10th century BC, a series of changes set the stage for an Assyrian resurgence. The once hostile Aramean tribes began settling into more stable communities, some forming small independent states, while others assimilating into Assyrian territory. At the same time, a shift toward a wetter climate improved agricultural productivity, strengthening the economic foundation of the empire. Under the leadership of Ashurbanipal II, who ascended the throne in 934 BC, Assyria launched campaigns to reclaim lost territories. This expansion was accompanied by the reconstruction of cities and infrastructure. The Assyrian kings revitalized the heartland by resettling displaced populations into newly established or restored settlements. From the reign of Ashurbanipal II onward, Assyrian inscriptions once again recorded near-annual military campaigns, marking the beginning of the most thoroughly documented and militarily dominant period of Assyrian history. The first two rulers of the Neo-Assyrian period were Adad-nirari II and Tukulti-Ninurta II. Their military campaigns focused on intimidation, tribute collection, and minimal direct confrontation. Adad-nirari II reasserted Assyrian control in southeastern territories and cemented peace with Babylonia through diplomacy and intermarriage, while Tukulti-Ninurta II extracted wealth from many local rulers and used selective violence as a deterrent. To better understand how the Assyrians used brutality and fear as tools of governance, I've put together a video that looks closely at their methods and motivations. Due to the sensitivity of the topic, I have uploaded the video to my Patreon page. It's completely free to watch. You can find the link in the description. Tukulti-Ninurta II was succeeded by Ashurnasirpal II, who significantly expanded the empire. He campaigned on the Zagros Mountains, the Upper Tigris region, and most notably the west, where he invaded numerous Aramean and Neo-Hittite cities. His western campaigns reached as far as the Mediterranean, where he extracted tribute from most of the Phoenician and Canaanite cities in the northern Levant. These conquests brought Ashurnasirpal an immense amount of wealth, from wheat and barley to gold, silver, textiles, and whatever valuables the conquered or tributary cities had to offer. This wealth allowed him to sustain and strengthen the powerful army he had built. It also funded one of his most ambitious undertakings. Ashurnasirpal transferred the royal seat from the traditional capital of Ashur to Kalu, a relatively modest provincial city near the confluence of the Great Zab and Tigris rivers. He oversaw the construction of a monumental palace and several temples, transforming Kalu into the administrative center of the empire. The new capital, 6 times larger than Ashur, was not only more strategically located but also better suited for agriculture and military logistics. Ashurnasirpal repopulated Kalu with craftsmen, officials, and workers drawn from across Assyria, people handpicked for their allegiance to the king. This likely served to diminish the influence of the traditional elites from older cities like Ashur and Nineveh, whom Ashurnasirpal reportedly distrusted. The grand inauguration of the palace in 864 BC was celebrated with a lavish banquet attended by nearly 70,000 guests from all corners of the empire and beyond. It was a stunning public display of the king's wealth, authority, and vision for a powerful multicultural empire. In 858 BC, Ashurnasirpal II was succeeded by his son, Shalmaneser III. Shalmaneser launched over 30 military campaigns during his reign. Early in his rule, he consolidated Assyrian control over the region around the upper Euphrates. His efforts in this region were part of a broader strategy of cultural and administrative integration, evidenced by his renaming of cities and the relocation of Assyrian settlers into conquered territories. However, unlike his father, Shalmaneser was more focused on projecting power across a vast region than on directly incorporating foreign lands into the empire. His forces traversed distant territories, from the Zagros Mountains in the east to the Cilician Gates in the west, mostly establishing tributary relationships with local rulers. While vassalage was formalized, Shalmaneser's control was far from absolute. In 853 BC, at the Battle of Karkar, he faced a coalition of 12 Levantine states led by Damascus, which had revolted and refused to pay tribute. Although Shalmaneser claimed victory, the continued resistance from Damascus indicates that his authority in the Levant was still actively challenged. Shalmaneser made diplomatic inroads in Babylon by supporting King Marduk-Zakir-Shumi against internal rivals. The alliance between the two kings was commemorated in a relief at Kalu. In the final years of his reign, Shalmaneser's grip on power weakened significantly. As age and health issues confined him to the palace, his top commander, Dayan Ashur, assumed control of his military campaigns. This change hinted at a broader transformation in Assyrian governance. Senior military officials stationed along the kingdom's volatile frontiers began to gain substantial autonomy and influence. While they enhanced regional development and security, their growing ambition sowed seeds of political instability. A succession crisis erupted near the end of Shalmaneser's life when he named his younger son Shamshi-Adad V as crown prince, bypassing his eldest son and previously designated heir Ashur-din-aplu. The latter, backed by major Assyrian cities like Nineveh and Ashur, launched a rebellion that took years to suppress. Upon Shalmaneser's death in 824 BC, his son Shamshi-Adad V faced continued resistance and spent 4 more years battling rivals before securing the throne, aided in part by Babylonian support. Although he eventually brought an end to the internal strife, the crown had been permanently weakened. This marked the beginning of a period known as the Age of Magnates, during which Assyrian kings held only limited authority. Real power rested with senior generals who often acted independently and sometimes in competition with one another, leading to political stagnation. The only significant exception in this era was the reign of Shamshi-Adad's son, Adad-nirari III, and his mother, Shamur-Amat. When Adad-nirari ascended the throne, he was too young to rule on his own. Though never officially crowned as regent, his mother, Shamur-Amat, effectively governed in his stead. A few years after Shamur-Amat's death, though, authority gradually shifted again, this time to the powerful general Shamshi-Ilu, who became the dominant figure in the empire, relegating the king to a largely ceremonial role. Between 765 and 746 BC, Assyria was further destabilized by successive outbreaks of plague, economic decline, and widespread revolts, including a major uprising in the city of Ashur. This period of crisis further weakened central authority and brought the empire to the brink of collapse. However, in 745 BC, a man of royal lineage named Pulu led a revolt in the capital city of Kalu. He emerged victorious and the following year ascended the throne under the name Tiglath-pileser III. His rise to power marked the end of the Age of Magnates and the beginning of the golden age of the Assyrian Empire. As soon as he became king, Tiglath-pileser moved quickly to dismantle the power of the Magnates. He purged the old elite, appointing loyal officials to key military and administrative positions. He reclaimed royal prerogatives that had been usurped by generals during the previous era, such as supreme command of the army and suppression of revolts. Then, the Assyrian king embarked on a series of military campaigns. He subdued rebellious tribes and annexed vast territories, including those of Urartu and several Syrian city-states such as Arpad and Patina, along with half of Israel, each transformed into Assyrian provinces. His forces advanced to the border of Egypt, extracting tribute from Judah, Moab, and other neighboring kingdoms. Furthermore, Tiglath-pileser ended Babylon's long-standing autonomy by conquering the city, deposing its ruling dynasty, and eventually proclaiming himself king. Tiglath-pileser III implemented large-scale deportations, relocating hundreds of thousands of people from conquered regions to bolster the labor force in the Assyrian heartland and repopulate newly annexed areas with loyal subjects. Tiglath-pileser was succeeded by his eldest son and crown prince, Shalmaneser V. He led successful expeditions that expanded the empire further into Anatolia and the Levant. In 722 BC, however, a younger son of Tiglath-pileser named Sargon launched a coup and seized the throne from his brother. Such a power grab was highly unusual in Assyrian succession, and to legitimize his actions, Sargon claimed that Shalmaneser had angered the god Ashur by imposing excessive taxation on the citizens of Ashur. When Sargon came to power, the empire fell into turmoil. Several distant provinces broke away and unrest spread across its borders. In Babylonia, a powerful Chaldean leader named Marduk-apla-iddina II declared himself king, supported by Elamite allies. Meanwhile, to the west, a warlord had managed to forge a great anti-Assyrian alliance, rallying recently conquered cities such as Samaria and Damascus. Sargon launched his counter-offensive by campaigning against Marduk-apla-iddina. However, this effort was thwarted by strong Elamite resistance. Turning westward, Sargon found greater success. At the Battle of the Orontes River, the rebel forces were crushed and the territories were reabsorbed into the empire. Samaria's population was deported and the leader of the anti-Assyrian alliance was executed. Sargon continued his military expansion in the years that followed. In 717 BC, he captured and plundered the wealthy city of Carchemish. In 714, he waged war against the kingdom of Urartu, defeating its army and king near Lake Urmia and looting the sacred city of Musasir. His campaigns pushed Assyrians into the lands of the Medes against Arabian tribes and their queens, and westward into Anatolia, where he confronted the Phrygian king, Midas. In 710 BC, Sargon turned his attention southward and launched a successful campaign to reclaim Babylonia. Marduk-apla-iddina fled, and Sargon entered Babylon to a warm and celebratory reception. Captivated by the city's splendor, he remained there for 3 years, participating in festivals honoring the god Marduk and hosting foreign envoys, while his son Sennacherib managed the imperial court. In 706 BC, Sargon relocated the royal court from Kalu to a newly constructed capital named Dur-Sharukin, meaning the Fort of Sargon. Built over a decade by thousands of laborers, the city featured walls and palaces. The construction of the new capital may have been a strategic move to distance Sargon from lingering political opposition in Kalu, where some still questioned the legitimacy of his rule. Not all of Sargon's actions were well received. His love for Babylon and the establishment of a new capital stirred resentment among many Assyrians. They believed he had sidelined the god Ashur in favor of Marduk. Though Ashurbanipal II had once established a new capital, setting a precedent in Assyrian history, Sargon's similar endeavor was seen by some as a display of excessive pride and as a sign of hubris. Sargon's reign came to a sudden end in 705 BC during a campaign in south-central Anatolia. While attempting to suppress a rebellion in the mountainous region of Tabal led by a figure named Kurdi, his army was ambushed. The Assyrian forces were caught completely off guard and Sargon was killed in the fighting. His body was never recovered. This was the first time an Assyrian king had died in battle, and the disappearance of his body made the situation much more terrible because, according to Mesopotamian belief, a soul denied proper burial would become a restless and vengeful spirit. For the Assyrians, the very thought of their king's ghost, the earthly representative of the god Ashur, wandering in unrest, was profoundly terrifying. Sargon's death cast a heavy shadow over the court, and most of all over his son Sennacherib, who succeeded him. In an effort to make sense of the catastrophe, Sennacherib later claimed that his father's downfall was divine punishment for favoring Babylon over Ashur. He decided to distance himself as much as possible from his father's policies and legacy. Believing Dur-Sharukin to be cursed, Sennacherib abandoned the newly built capital and relocated the royal court once again, this time to Nineveh, where he initiated an ambitious building program. Over time, Nineveh grew to twice the size of Kalhu and Dur-Sharukin combined, with great walls, palaces, temples, towers, arsenals, boulevards, and gardens. Much of Sennacherib's reign was consumed by rebellion. Just 2 years after his ascension, the exiled rebel leader Marduk-apla-iddina returned to Babylonia. With Elamite support and the backing of several southern Babylonian cities, he rose against Assyrian rule and declared himself king. Sennacherib marched south and defeated the rebels near the city of Kish. Marduk-apla-iddina fled into the marshes and evaded capture, but his palace was sacked and his family and court were taken to Assyria. Rather than govern Babylon directly, Sennacherib appointed a puppet ruler, Bel-Ibni, a Babylonian noble raised in the Assyrian palace. This arrangement gave Babylon nominal autonomy while maintaining Assyrian control. In 701 BC, rebellion broke out in the Levant. The kingdom of Judah joined forces with the Philistine cities of Ekron and Ashkelon in defiance of Assyrian rule. Sennacherib responded swiftly. He first subdued the Philistine cities and then turned his attention to Judah. The city of Lachish was besieged, conquered, and destroyed. Those who survived the siege were deported throughout the empire. A vivid depiction of the siege is preserved on Sennacherib's palace at Nineveh. The Assyrian army then advanced toward Jerusalem and encamped outside its gates. There, the general Rabshakeh delivered a warning to the Judeans: surrender or face the same fate as Lachish. He told them that if they capitulated, some would be resettled in another region of the empire, but assured them they would be treated fairly and provided with ample food and drink. However, the siege of Jerusalem never took place. According to the biblical account, this was because an angel struck down a large number of Assyrian troops during the night, forcing the surviving army to retreat. Most modern scholars believe the more likely explanation is that Sennacherib made a strategic decision. Besieging Jerusalem, a heavily fortified city, would have required considerable time and could have led to significant losses. Several other theories have been proposed, such as the outbreak of a plague in the Assyrian camp, but none can be confirmed. The most plausible explanation is that Sennacherib, following his broader imperial policy, preferred indirect control, allowing the Judean king Hezekiah to remain a vassal king who paid tribute rather than risking further military costs. Additional pressures, including unrest in Babylonia, may also have influenced his decision to withdraw. The resumption of tribute payments after the Assyrian withdrawal suggests an agreement was reached, re-establishing Judah's status as a vassal state. A few months later, Babylon once again erupted in revolt. The rule of the puppet king Bel-Ibni had been unsuccessful. Only 3 years after his installation, Babylonia was engulfed in turmoil, fueled by anti-Assyrian sentiments. At the forefront of this resistance were two men, Mushezib-Marduk, a Chaldean and former officer in the Assyrian army, and the ever-restless Marduk-apla-iddina, who was once again rallying support against the Assyrians. In response, the Assyrian army marched into Babylonia in 700 BC, but both leaders and some of their troops managed to escape to Elam. Due to Bel-Ibni's incompetence, Sennacherib removed him from power and installed a more trusted ruler, his own eldest son, Ashur-nadin-shumi, as king of Babylon. 6 years later, in 694, Sennacherib launched a campaign against Elam to punish them for sheltering the Babylonian rebels. Instead of advancing overland, he led a naval expedition through the Persian Gulf, catching the Elamites by surprise and capturing several settlements. The Elamites retaliated swiftly. They invaded Assyrian-controlled Babylonia and captured the city of Sippar. Amidst the chaos, rebels in Babylon stormed the palace, captured Ashur-nadin-shumi, and handed him over to Elam, where he was executed. In his place, the Babylonians appointed Nergal-ushezib, a member of the local aristocracy, as their new king. While some cities recognized him, others remained loyal to Assyria. Fueled by rage over his son's death, Sennacherib launched a campaign into southern Babylonia. His forces overwhelmed Nergal-ushezib's army, killing him and even one of the Elamite king's sons, Halushu in Shushinak. Yet chaos persisted. Some cities defected to Assyria, while others remained independent. Sennacherib, driven by vengeance, pressed deeper into Elam in the winter of 693 and 692 BC. Initial victories soon turned to disaster when the Assyrian army was trapped by heavy snow near the Elamite city of Madaktu, forcing a retreat. Chaos continued to grip Babylonia as the independent cities formed an alliance with the new Elamite king, Humban-Menanu, and elected the new king of Babylon, the rebel Mushezib-Marduk. In 691 BC, a coalition consisting of Babylonians, Elamites, Chaldeans, Arameans, and even Persians marched into the Assyrian heartland. For the first time in centuries, the Assyrians faced a direct threat to their core territories. The coalition army clashed with an Assyrian force led by Sennacherib at the Battle of Halule. The conflict ended in a stalemate, with the coalition retreating south and the Assyrians withdrawing to their cities to reorganize in preparation for a counter-invasion. The following year, fortunately for the Assyrians, the Elamite-Babylonian alliance dissolved. Seizing the opportunity, Sennacherib marched south with a massive army to lay siege to Babylon. Since the conflict between Assyria and Babylonia recurs so frequently in Assyrian history, I think this is a good moment to take a step back and examine the nature of the relationship. The Assyrians were captivated by Babylon's much older and more sophisticated traditions. Beginning with Tiglath-pileser III, Assyrian monarchs emphasized Babylon's uniqueness by assuming its royal titles and participating in its sacred festivals. Furthermore, Babylonia was the only region in the empire that was frequently granted a degree of seeming autonomy out of respect for its culture. However, it was precisely because of this rich cultural heritage that the Babylonians developed a strong sense of pride, which fueled their enduring passion for independence. As we have seen, over the centuries, this led to numerous revolts that continually undermined the image of authority the Assyrians sought to project. It was in the face of this long-standing pattern of resistance that Sennacherib, who believed his father had been punished by the gods for favoring Babylon and the god Marduk, broke with tradition. Unlike his predecessors, he did not share their reverence for the city. After multiple conflicts and uprisings in Babylonia during his reign, he finally had enough. Despite facing incredibly dire conditions, the Babylonians fought fiercely and held their city for 15 months. In the end, however, the city fell, and Sennacherib gave the command that the center of the world, the pillar of religion, culture, and intellectual life in Mesopotamia, be utterly and completely destroyed. The Babylonians were slaughtered without mercy. The city's temples were burned, its gods were desecrated, and its walls and palaces were destroyed. According to an inscription commissioned by Sennacherib, the Assyrians carved canals through the center of the city, allowing the ruins to be swallowed by water. While Sennacherib's claims may have been somewhat exaggerated, it is clear from the archaeological evidence that the city's destruction was devastating. The sack of Babylon sent shockwaves throughout the Near East. Even many Assyrians were appalled by the level of devastation inflicted upon a city they had long respected. To manage their discomfort and justify the destruction, the Assyrian elite circulated propaganda such as the Marduk ordeal text, which twisted Babylonian religious rituals into a mock trial condemning the god Marduk. Sennacherib even transferred sacred objects and statues and tried to reshape Assyrian religious institutions to reflect those of Babylon. The Assyrians adopted the Akitu New Year festival and rewrote the Babylonian epic of creation, elevating the god Ashur as the conqueror of chaos, thereby replacing Marduk's role in the narrative. Although Babylon suffered a devastating blow and was subjected to cultural assimilation, its legacy endured. Over time, the city was gradually rebuilt, first by its own people and later by Assyrian rulers who would come to regret the destruction they had wrought upon the city. Despite all this, Sennacherib managed to maintain stability in the empire for several years and devoted the remainder of his reign to constructing the new capital at Nineveh. However, his time on the throne would not conclude peacefully. Sennacherib's eldest son, Ordumulishu, had long expected to inherit the throne, but was unexpectedly passed over in favor of a younger half-brother, Esarhaddon, likely due to the influence of Esarhaddon's mother, the queen Nakia. The sudden demotion made Ordumulishu furious, leading him to orchestrate his father's assassination in 681 BC. Despite warnings from informants, the conspiracy was successful. Sennacherib was killed while visiting a temple in Nineveh. Following the assassination, internal strife erupted among the conspirators, creating a power vacuum. Seizing the opportunity, Esarhaddon returned from exile with a small force, gaining support as some of his brother's troops defected to him. With his rivals fleeing in panic, he entered Nineveh and claimed the throne, aided in part by the strong political influence of his mother. Once in power, he initiated a series of campaigns aimed at consolidating his rule and expanding the empire. In 680 BC, he suppressed a revolt in the south led by Nabu-zer-Kiti-Lishir, who ultimately fled to Elam, where he was captured and executed. In 679 BC, the Assyrian army campaigned as far as Arza near Egypt, an early indication of the empire's growing ambitions toward the Nile Valley. At the same time, Assyria was engaged in conflicts in Cilicia, clashing with the nomadic Cimmerians and Scythians, while also conducting campaigns to the north and east, including an unsuccessful expedition in the Tabal region. In 677 BC, the Assyrians captured Sidon, executed its king, turned the city into a province, and secured an alliance with Tyre. That same year, they expanded both south and north, venturing into Arabia and pushing into Median territory in Iran. In 674 BC, Sennacherib ordered a massive invasion of Egypt via the coast, but the campaign ended in disaster. The defeat prompted the defection of key allies and raised serious doubts about Esarhaddon's leadership, particularly since he had not even participated in the campaign. At the same time, Esarhaddon's health was in decline. He suffered from recurring illnesses and gradually withdrew from court life, which alarmed his physicians and advisors. Nevertheless, in 671 BC, Esarhaddon launched a second campaign against Egypt. While he remained behind to offer prayers, his army avoided the coastal route and crossed the Sinai Desert with the support of Arab tribes. After defeating the Egyptian forces near Magdalu, they captured Memphis. Pharaoh fled, but his family and a large portion of his wealth were taken to Assyria. Esarhaddon claimed to have freed Egypt from foreign rule, replacing the Nubian dynasty with a loyal local ruler named Necho. In practice, however, he imposed tight Assyrian control through heavy taxation and gave Egyptian cities Assyrian names. Amidst his many military campaigns, Esarhaddon also undertook the rebuilding of Babylon. He believed that his father Sennacherib had been assassinated in part due to his harsh anti-Babylonian policies, particularly the destruction of the city, which had provoked the wrath of the gods. At the same time, Esarhaddon feared that his grandfather, Sargon II, had gone too far in the opposite direction by being overly sympathetic to Babylonian traditions and failing to properly honor Ashur. In Esarhaddon's view, both extremes had led to divine punishment, and so he chose a middle path. He sought to respect the religious practices of both Assyria and Babylonia. The reconstruction of Babylon was slow and fraught with difficulties. The city's population had been left devastated and impoverished, with the few survivors struggling to meet even their most basic needs. At the same time, many Assyrian officials viewed the restoration effort as dangerously lenient given Babylon's long history of rebellion. Nonetheless, the restoration continued, and over the course of 2 decades, Babylon was rebuilt, although it paled in comparison to the city as it had been before the Assyrian sacking. At some point during the final years of his reign, Esarhaddon made a decision similar to his father's. He bypassed his firstborn son, Shamash-Shuma-Ukin, and named his younger son, Ashurbanipal, as heir to the throne. His eldest son was instead made king of Babylon, with the plan that he would continue the restoration of the city and secure its rule. While Shamash-Shuma-Ukin was understandably disgruntled, he chose to accept the position peacefully and recognize his younger brother as heir. Esarhaddon's health continued to deteriorate, and he became increasingly consumed by anxiety over ominous signs and portents concerning his reign. He was unable to participate in military campaigns, palace affairs, or even religious ceremonies. This absence of leadership created an atmosphere of instability that gave rise to efforts to overthrow him. In 671 BC, multiple groups of powerful elites conspired against the king in cities such as Haran, Nineveh, and Ashur. However, Esarhaddon had already established an extensive surveillance network and had achieved unwavering loyalty through binding oaths from both citizens and vassals. These measures proved effective, and the conspiracies ultimately failed. In the aftermath, gripped by fear of further dissent, Esarhaddon ordered a brutal purge of the nobility and retreated further into paranoia. In 669 BC, while en route to Egypt to suppress a rebellion, Esarhaddon fell ill and died. Thus, Ashurbanipal ascended to the throne. Early in his reign, he launched a campaign to re-establish Assyrian dominance over Egypt. His forces successfully expelled the Kushite pharaoh Taharqa, who had exploited regional instability to regain control of Egyptian territory. In the aftermath, the Assyrians made Egypt a vassal once again. However, after Taharqa's death, his successor Tutankhamun invaded Egypt again and briefly recaptured Memphis. Ashurbanipal responded by sending his army back to Egypt, defeating Tutankhamun and sacking the city of Thebes, the religious center of Upper Egypt. Although this was a great victory for the Assyrians, the sacking of Thebes deeply angered the Egyptians and fueled their resentment. As a result, Assyria's grip on Egypt gradually weakened. Eventually, Necho's son, Psamtik I, with support from foreign allies such as the Lydians and Greeks, consolidated his power and declared independence. Lacking the strength to reclaim Egypt by force, Assyria effectively lost control over the region. In 653 BC, Ashurbanipal launched a campaign against Elam, a long-standing rival and supporter of rebellious Babylonian factions. At the Battle of the Ulai River, the Assyrians dealt a crushing defeat to the Elamite army. Teumman, the king of Elam, and his son Tamaritu were both killed in the fighting. Meanwhile, tensions simmered in Babylonia. As we mentioned, Ashurbanipal's older brother, Shamash-shuma-ukin, had been installed as king of Babylon by their father. While this arrangement initially preserved peace between Assyria and Babylonia, it gradually deteriorated. Shamash-shuma-ukin grew increasingly resentful of his subordinate status and his brother's growing interference in Babylonian affairs. In response, he forged alliances with the Elamites, Chaldeans, and Arameans, eventually igniting a full-scale civil war. The conflict dragged on for 4 years, wreaking havoc across much of Mesopotamia. In the final year of the war, Ashurbanipal besieged Babylon for months, cutting off supplies and causing starvation and disease within the city, which really can't catch a break. Ultimately, Babylon fell and Shamash-shuma-ukin was killed during the sack. Although Ashurbanipal emerged victorious, the war had come at a high cost, severely depleting Assyrian resources. In the aftermath, Ashurbanipal appointed a loyal Babylonian governor to restore order. In 646 BC, the Assyrians launched another campaign against Elam, which had supported Ashurbanipal's brother during the rebellion. This time, they penetrated deep into Elamite territory and utterly devastated the kingdom. They sacked countless cities and towns, including the capital Susa, which they razed to the ground, destroying its temples, palaces, and great walls. Elam, a civilization nearly as ancient as Sumer, was reduced to ruins. With this campaign, the Assyrians effectively ended Elamite political power once and for all. After the Assyrian army withdrew, Elam remained fragmented, divided into a series of petty kingdoms. Despite all their military triumphs, the Assyrian Empire began to show signs of decline. Its armies were stretched thin, resources were depleted, and provincial leaders grew increasingly defiant. Ashurbanipal managed to hold the empire together largely through intimidation and propaganda. In his official records, Ashurbanipal painted a picture of plenty. He claimed there were abundant harvests, overflowing plunder, and rock-bottom prices for food and essentials. Early in his reign, things may have been stable, but by the mid-650s BC, the cracks were beginning to show. Records tell of failed harvests, rising prices, and a general sense of hardship spreading through the empire. In the final years of Ashurbanipal's reign, conditions worsened dramatically. Many families were on the brink of starvation, and copper, a far less valuable metal than silver, began to replace silver in trade. The king's proclamations no longer reflected the harsh reality faced by his people. Yet, even as his empire faltered, Ashurbanipal left behind a cultural legacy that would far outlast Assyria's political dominance: the Great Royal Library of Nineveh. He brought together an extraordinary collection of texts ranging from astrology and rituals to medicine and epic literature. In fact, Ashurbanipal's goal was to gather every significant text ever written. Initially, many tablets were acquired through scholarly correspondence and exchanges, but following the brutal civil war, Ashurbanipal also looted valuable works from Babylon. Among the treasures of the library were works such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, extensive collections of medical knowledge, and detailed treatises on omens and rituals. It is thanks to this library that our understanding of Mesopotamia is so rich. Without it, thousands of works and vast amounts of historical information about the region would have been lost forever. Ashurbanipal wanted to cultivate an image of himself as both a formidable warrior and a learned scholar, but the reality was quite different. His military victories were indeed impressive. However, most of the campaigns were carried out by his generals, while the king often remained in the capital. This image of a formidable warrior, carefully constructed through elaborate reliefs and inscriptions, greatly exaggerated his heroism while obscuring his shortcomings as a ruler. The most iconic representation of his supposed bravery is the series of lion hunt reliefs, some of which depict him battling lions with his bare hands. To the modern eye, this dramatic scene suggests a fearless king confronting great beasts in the open wilderness. In truth, however, the hunts took place within an enclosure in Nineveh, where weakened, starved lions were set loose for the king to kill from his chariot. For all his positive attributes, Ashurbanipal was a man with deep insecurities, increasingly removed from effective governance, whose violent excesses against his own people and endless costly campaigns helped hasten the unraveling of the empire. This is evidenced by the fact that the empire was destroyed less than 20 years after his reign. Assyria's decline was the result of several factors. Esarhaddon's purges of the ruling elite gutted the empire's administrative core. Countless capable officials were executed and replaced by less competent figures who struggled to maintain effective governance. Later, Ashurbanipal began to distance himself from direct rule, leaving military campaigns in the hands of his generals and domestic affairs to inexperienced palace officials. This further weakened the government's efficiency and eroded internal cohesion. At the same time, the empire became dangerously overstretched, burdened by a constant cycle of costly campaigns. Meanwhile, the Assyrian heartland suffered from recurring droughts, placing even more strain on an already fragile system. Ashurbanipal died in 631 BC, and his son Ashur-etil-ilani ascended to the throne. However, as he was still a child, real power appears to have rested with a court eunuch who reportedly guided the young king. The final 2 decades of Assyrian history remain shrouded in mystery due to fragmentary sources. What is known is that Ashur-etil-ilani ruled for only 4 years before vanishing from the historical record. In an unprecedented move, Shin-shumu-lisir, the eunuch who had been guiding the king, seized the throne. His reign, however, was short-lived. He was overthrown within months by Ashur-etil-ilani's brother, Shin-shar-ishkun, who then assumed kingship. Taking advantage of the throne crisis, a man of Chaldean descent named Nabopolassar, once an Assyrian official himself, seized the throne of Babylon and launched a rebellion in 620 BC. While Assyria struggled with internal divisions and the devastating droughts, Babylonia's irrigation-based agriculture continued to produce abundant crops, providing Nabopolassar with the resources needed to sustain a prolonged military campaign against the Assyrians. At the same time, a new power was starting to rise in the east, the Medes. The Medes were an Iranian tribal people from the Zagros Mountains who had lived under loose Assyrian control for decades. Ironically, Assyrian attempts to consolidate control over the region only served to strengthen and unify the Medes against them. An important factor in their ascent was the near-total destruction of Elam, a power that had long kept the Iranians in check. By conquering Elam, the Assyrians had inadvertently cleared the way for Median expansion. Now united under King Cyaxares, the Medes joined forces with Nabopolassar's Babylonia, forming an alliance with a single goal: the destruction of Assyria. In 615 BC, the offensive began. The city of Ashur was the first major target. Ashur was the sacred birthplace of the empire and the seat of the god Ashur, whose temple symbolized the king's divine right to rule. For centuries, the city had remained untouched by war, but now it faced a brutal siege. Despite valiant defense, the Medes and Babylonians eventually captured Ashur, set fire to its temples and palaces, and carried out a mass slaughter of its population. Ashur's destruction dealt a great psychological blow to the Assyrian people. 3 years later, in 612 BC, the coalition forces laid siege to Nineveh, the capital and crown jewel of the Assyrian Empire. Yet even this mighty city with its towering walls could not withstand the attack. When the defenses were finally reached, the invaders unleashed a wave of destruction. The remaining Assyrian soldiers, along with the majority of the city's population, were slaughtered, while fires consumed the temples, the royal palaces, and the great library. The Babylonians, along with a small band of Elamites who had joined their ranks, defaced the statues of Assyrian kings and toppled them in a frenzy of rage and vengeance. Amidst the chaos, King Sin-Sharishkun perished in the fighting, and with his death, central authority in Assyria collapsed. Many Assyrian cities were destroyed or abandoned, with large segments of the population killed or displaced. The Medes were exceptionally brutal in their conquest. As a consequence of the attacks, the Assyrian irrigation systems fell into disrepair, contributing to a further decline. Although small Assyrian enclaves persisted temporarily, they were isolated and lacked real power. The Medes expanded their influence over the northern regions, while Babylonia consolidated control over former Assyrian territories in the south. Thus, the greatest empire the world had ever seen passed into history, leaving a lasting legacy. The army of the Neo-Assyrian Empire was among the most formidable and sophisticated military forces of the ancient world. The backbone of the army was the infantry, which was divided into light, regular, and heavy units. Light infantry included archers, slingers, and javelin throwers who were essential for skirmishing and ranged attacks. They typically wore little to no armor. These units were often drawn from different ethnic groups and served as auxiliaries rather than part of the standing army. For example, historical records mention Aramean and Elamite archers as well as Judean pikemen who served either within formal military structures or as tribal levies under mixed Assyrian and local command. The regular infantry formed the core of the professional army. These soldiers were trained, disciplined, and organized into tight formations. Equipped with spears, shields, and swords that were capable of both offensive and defensive roles. Recruitment for the regular infantry came primarily from the Assyrian heartland, particularly from rural peasant populations. While Assyrians formed the core of the regular infantry, subject peoples and allies from regions such as Elam and Urartu also contributed troops. One might wonder, how did all these different ethnic groups communicate with one another? The answer lies in the widespread integration of the Arameans throughout the Assyrian Empire. Their numbers were so significant that the Aramaic language eventually became the lingua franca of the empire. The heavy infantry was comprised of elite, heavily armored forces deployed primarily as shock troops during sieges and major offensives. These units included mostly spearmen, but also archers and slingers, all equipped with standardized scale armor and helmets. In addition to combat, these troops engaged in logistical and auxiliary tasks, such as dismantling walls, engineering and building siege towers, burning enemy encampments, and securing captured territory and prisoners. An elite group known as the Kurbutu served as royal bodyguards and consisted of both infantry and cavalry. They escorted the king, crown prince, and queen mother, while also undertaking administrative roles. Trusted with sensitive missions, they often acted as envoys, logistics officers, and commanders. Chariotry was a hallmark of Assyrian military power, especially in earlier periods. Typically consisting of a 4-horse chariot manned by an archer, a shield-bearer, and a driver, these units were used to break enemy lines and support infantry. Although their battlefield role diminished over time due to terrain limitations and evolving military tactics, chariots retained their prestige. They were prominent in royal processions, and some elite chariot units continued to operate in combat roles in flat regions. Between the 9th and 8th centuries BC, cavalry evolved from a supplementary force into a central military arm. The Assyrians pioneered the development of armored cavalry, with both riders and horses equipped with protective gear. This innovation made the cavalry capable of sustained combat. Cavalry units became increasingly specialized, incorporating mounted archers and lancers and organizing into squadrons of approximately 100 men, large enough to act independently yet small enough for tactical maneuvering. The Assyrian model of cavalry warfare heavily influenced many subsequent powers, including the Scythians, Medes, and Persians. The strength of the Assyrian military lay not only in its battlefield prowess, but also in its administration. While the king frequently led campaigns in person, a group of high officials and bureaucrats managed logistics, troop provisioning, and battlefield organization. Infantry units were led by cohort commanders, while cavalry and chariot forces were typically under the authority of high-ranking officials, including the two Turtanu, or commanders-in-chief, the chief eunuch, and the chief cupbearer. Units were supported by scribes, engineers, scouts, and diviners. Ceremonial chariots often carried divine standards into battle, especially that of Ninurta, god of war and victory. The Assyrians also revolutionized siege warfare, employing battering rams, siege towers, and sappers to breach fortifications. Although relatively small, naval forces played a crucial role, operating along the Tigris and Euphrates as well as coastal regions such as the Levant. Assyrian ships transported troops, horses, and equipment. While the Assyrians did not engage in large-scale naval battles, their control of port cities and riverine transport routes was strategically vital. Naval operations in open seas such as the Mediterranean and Persian Gulf were typically manned by expert sailors from Phoenician and Greek populations. Given that Mesopotamian religion with its various branches spanned 3,500 years, it is important to understand that its beliefs and structures evolved significantly over time. The earliest religious institutions emerged in the city-states of Sumer in southern Mesopotamia. The Sumerian pantheon consisted primarily of deities who personified natural forces such as the sky, earth, water, and wind, as well as abstract social principles like justice and fundamental aspects of life such as fertility. These gods were imagined with human-like personalities. Each city had its own patron deity, and securing the deity's favor was considered essential for a city's prosperity and protection. Furthermore, their temples functioned as institutions that served economic and administrative roles. The Akkadians eventually adopted Sumerian religious traditions, blending them with their own and introducing new deities in the process. This synthesis formed the foundation for the later religious systems of Babylonia and Assyria. Anu was the highest deity in the early Babylonian pantheon, revered as the father and king of the gods. From Anu came the Anunnaki, literally the descendants of Anu, which encompassed most of the other gods. Among Anu's children were Enlil and Ea. Enlil, the god of heaven, and earth, eventually succeeded Anu as the king of the gods in early Babylonia and Assyria. He wielded the tablets of destiny, which determined the cosmic order. He was both a creator and a destroyer. Ea, or Enki in Sumerian, was the god of life-giving water, magic, and crafts, and unlike Anu and Enlil, he consistently showed kindness toward humanity. Known as the Lord of Incantations, he was the source of all civilizing knowledge, including writing, building, and agriculture. Eventually, following the establishment of the Old Babylonian Empire, we witnessed the gradual rise of a previously minor Semitic deity, the god Marduk. Traditionally believed to be the son of Ea, Marduk was steadily elevated to the pinnacle of the pantheon, ultimately becoming regarded as the king of the gods. As the patron god of the city of Babylon, Marduk's ascent closely paralleled Babylon's own rise. While Marduk rose to prominence in southern Mesopotamia, another deity gained prominence in the north, the god Ashur. Ashur began as an enigmatic, nature-associated god in the late 3rd millennium BC, worshipped as the local god of the city that bore his name. Unlike the anthropomorphic gods of Mesopotamia, Ashur was initially conceived in abstract terms. His temple was called the Wild Bull, and some depictions merged him with the surrounding landscape or portrayed him as a bull. However, over time, Ashur came to be represented in human form. As Assyria evolved from a merchant city into a militaristic empire, Ashur became the divine embodiment of war and order. During that time, Ashur also became king of the gods. In addition to Marduk and Ashur, many other deities were worshipped. Among the most prominent was Ishtar, the most famous goddess in Mesopotamia. Known to the Sumerians as Inanna, she was the goddess of love, fertility, and war. Ishtar played a vital role in the Assyrian state. The kings of Assyria frequently prayed to her and sought her guidance. It is important to note that different versions of Ishtar were worshipped in various cities. For example, the Ishtar of Ashur differed from the Ishtar of Nineveh and the Ishtar of Arbela, the latter considered the most warlike. The storm god Adad was especially revered by the Assyrians due to their reliance on rain for agriculture. Adad was introduced to Mesopotamia from the Levant and southern Anatolia and soon became a major deity. Shamash, the sun god, was the dispenser of justice. Additional important gods included Sin, the moon god and father of Shamash, Ereshkigal, the goddess of the underworld and sister of Ishtar, Nergal, the god of disease and death and husband of Ereshkigal, Nabu, the god of scribes and wisdom, Dumuzid, the god of shepherds, fertility and agriculture, who spent half the year in the underworld and was Ishtar's husband, and Ninurta, a heroic deity associated with hunting, healing and warfare. Beyond the gods, the Mesopotamian religious landscape included various other beings. One notable group was the Apkallu, 7 semi-divine sages created by the god Ea. The Apkallu were said to have imparted knowledge to humanity and acted as protective spirits. They were sometimes depicted with human bodies and animal heads. Mesopotamian beliefs also featured a variety of demons. While some were rather neutral, the majority were malevolent beings responsible for disease, death, and curses. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous Mesopotamian epics and tales. One tale particularly beloved by the Assyrians was the Epic of Gilgamesh. Originally a Sumerian hero, Gilgamesh's story as we know today was created in Babylonia. The narrative involves a series of exploits of Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu. Enkidu's death, decreed by the god Enlil as punishment for defying divine authority, deeply affects Gilgamesh and sets him on a quest to conquer death. His journey leads him to Utnapishtim, a human granted immortality by the gods. Utnapishtim recounts how the gods, intending to destroy humanity, unleashed a catastrophic flood. Forewarned by the god Ea, Utnapishtim built a large ship to save his family and as many animals as he could. After the waters receded, the gods regretted their destruction and allowed Utnapishtim and his wife to live forever. Utnapishtim then tells him that immortality is not meant for other human beings. However, he reveals the existence of a magical herb that can restore youth. Gilgamesh retrieves the plant but loses it to a snake, symbolizing the ultimate futility of his quest. Another famous story cherished by the Assyrians was the Babylonian Epic of Creation, also known by its opening words, Enuma Elish, when on high. Recited during Babylon's New Year festival, the epic replaced older Sumerian myths that portrayed creation as a peaceful collaboration among the gods. In contrast, the Enuma Elish begins with a primordial watery chaos personified by the goddess Tiamat, the embodiment of the saltwater ocean. Tiamat later united with Apsu, the god of the fresh water beneath the earth. From their union came the first generation of gods, whose unruly behavior provoked the wrath of both Apsu and Tiamat, who decided to kill them. However, Ea, using his magical powers, killed Apsu and took over his domain. There, his powerful son Marduk was born, and later chosen by the gods to battle Tiamat, who had created an army of monsters led by the primordial god Kingu. Marduk agreed to fight, but only if he was made ruler of the gods. Armed with lightning and other weapons, Marduk defeated Tiamat in a single combat and split her body to form the heavens and the earth. He also killed Kingu and created mankind from his blood. Humanity was created to serve the gods and relieve them of their labor. Marduk then organized the cosmos, assigning duties to the gods and building his temple Esagila in Babylon. Finally, the gods honored Marduk with 50 exalted names, recognizing him as king of the universe. Although myths and epics offer valuable insights into a religion, it's equally crucial to examine how the gods were worshipped and what specific rituals and ceremonies were performed. Within the temples, the gods were honored through daily rituals that involved offerings of food, fragrances, and music. Elaborate ceremonies ensured that the statues were meticulously cared for as living embodiments of the gods. Priests followed strict protocols to bathe and clothe the statues, maintaining the idea of a continuous divine presence. Animal sacrifice also played a fundamental role in worship. The priesthood was a structured and specialized institution comprising various ranks and roles such as chief priests, lamentation singers, exorcists, and diviners. Worship extended beyond the great temples to include small everyday ceremonies conducted in homes and local shrines. In Mesopotamia, exorcistic rituals were very frequent. These rites aimed to expel malevolent spirits believed to cause illness and misfortune. Such ceremonies were performed not only by priests but also by common people, often involving objects like figurines or masks. For instance, figurines of the demon Pazuzu, sometimes considered evil and other times protective, were used in apotropaic magic to ward off the demoness Lamashtu from homes. Religion was fundamentally important to the Assyrian state, as divine favor was the ultimate source of the king's authority. Far more than a political leader, the king was seen as the earthly representative and chosen servant of the god Ashur. His legitimacy, especially in matters of war and conquest, depended entirely on Ashur's blessing. Over time, Ashur came to be envisioned as the creator of the universe, the king of the gods, and the supreme source of cosmic order and divine authority. This theological framework served to justify Assyria's expansionism, framing imperial conquest as a sacred duty sanctioned by the divine. This is vividly expressed in the Assyrian coronation ceremony. When a new king ascended the throne, a solemn procession led him from the palace to the temple of Ashur. Upon arrival, a priest loudly proclaimed, "Ashur is king! Ashur is king!" The monarch then underwent purification rites before the statue of Ashur. He presented offerings such as precious stones and sacrifices before Ashur and other major gods. The ceremony's climax occurred when the king received the royal insignia, such as the scepter and the robe. Then, royal officials and eunuchs surrounded the king and chanted blessings that invoked Ashur and his wife Mulishu, the divine owners of the crown, to grant the monarch longevity and the power to expand his realm while governing with justice. Although the ritual emphasized divine order, justice, and peace, its underlying political message was unmistakably assertive. The call for the king to expand his land reflected a theology in which warfare and divine will were inextricably linked, an ideology that sustained and legitimized Assyrian imperialism for centuries. For the Assyrian kings, omen interpretation, especially liver divination, was extremely important. For example, if diviners predicted danger for the king would temporarily abdicate, placing a commoner on the throne to live as king for about a year before being sacrificed as a substitute. Afterward, the king would resume his rule. This practice was documented twice during the reign of Sennacherib. The deep integration of religion into Assyrian kingship is clearly reflected in the very names of the kings themselves. For example, Ashurbanipal means Ashur is the creator of the air. Ashurnasirpal means Ashur is the guardian of the air. Tukulta Ninurta means my trust is in Ninurta, and Adad Nirari means Adad is my help. The religious aspect in Mesopotamian warfare is often overlooked in historiography. When cities were conquered, their gods' statues were often plundered and brought to Assyria. This godnapping stripped the defeated city of divine protection and demonstrated the triumph of the god Ashur. Some of these statues were ritually defamed, but most of them were respectfully housed in Ashur's temple. Nowhere was religious rivalry in the ancient Near East more intense than between Assyria and Babylonia. For a time, Assyrian rulers embraced elements of Babylonian theology, worshipping Marduk and even participating in the Akitu festival, the New Year celebration during which the Enuma Elish was recited. But as political tensions escalated, so too did theological competition. When Sennacherib destroyed Babylon and its sanctuaries, he razed Marduk's temple, carried off his statue, and recentered Mesopotamian religious authority around Ashur. As we mentioned, even the Enuma Elish was revised, replacing Marduk with Ashur as the king of the gods. Yet posterity viewed Sennacherib's actions as excessive, perhaps even blasphemous. As we know, after his assassination, his son Esarhaddon adopted a conciliatory stance, initiating the rebuilding of Babylon and restoring its temples. Marduk's statue was returned from Ashur and traditional rituals resumed. The earliest known Assyrian artworks come from the archaic temple of Ishtar in the city of Ashur, which we discussed earlier. Excavations at this temple uncovered around 90 votive statues, typically less than 50 centimeters tall. These figures depict worshippers with folded hands and large, exaggerated eyes. The influence of Sumerian artistic traditions is clearly evident in these pieces. Other artworks from this period found in Ashur are primarily Sumerian or Akkadian in origin and include statues of Ashur's governors as well as Akkadian emperors and rulers from the 3rd dynasty of Ur. During the Old Assyrian period, art began to reflect a blend of Mesopotamian influences and Anatolian styles due to the emergence of Assyrian trading colonies. Archaeological findings from this period include clay seals and cuneiform tablets, often depicting scenes of worship and banquets. Other notable artifacts include drinking vessels shaped like animals or animal heads, clay figurines of humans, and a bath decorated with animal figures. Sculpture also showed significant improvement, as evidenced by a drinking vessel in the shape of a woman's head found in Ashur. As Assyria began to assert itself militarily and politically, it witnessed a significant transformation in artistic production. Under the reigns of kings such as Ashur-uballit and Tukulti-Ninurta, architectural and artistic projects were initiated to celebrate royal authority. During this time, palace reliefs and wall decorations began to appear. The Neo-Assyrian period marked the height of Assyrian art, coinciding with the empire's greatest territorial expansion and political power. Art during this era served not only as a medium of aesthetic expression, but also as a powerful instrument of royal propaganda. It was strongly influenced by Neo-Hittite, Aramaean, Syrian, and Egyptian styles. One of the most iconic features of this period was the monumental relief sculpture, found primarily in the palaces of Kalhu, Dur-Sharukin, and Nineveh. These reliefs combine stylized elegance with a striking degree of realism. A defining characteristic was the use of hieratic scale, in which larger figures indicated greater importance. It has been discovered that these reliefs were originally painted in vivid colors. The themes of the panels varied. One of the most common was the portrayal of military campaigns and sieges, which offer valuable insights into the nature of Assyrian warfare. Another prominent theme focused on Assyrian gods and religious rituals. Tribute-bearing vassals were also frequently portrayed, symbolizing the king's power and authority. Lastly, a famous subject was the royal hunt, especially depictions of King Ashurbanipal hunting lions. This period also witnessed the introduction of colossal guardian figures known as lamasu, winged bulls or lions with human heads. Some of them even incorporated fish-like features. Standing up to 5 meters tall, these hybrid beings symbolize the king's dominion over all realms, earth, sky, and sea. In addition to large-scale works, the Neo-Assyrian period excelled in the luxury arts. Intricately carved ivory plaques, often used as furniture inlays, reflect both artistic refinement and the empire's extensive trade network. Precious metal objects such as ceremonial weapons, jewelry, and vessels made of bronze and gold were also very prominent. The legacy of Assyria in both the Near East and the wider world is immense. Although the empire was ultimately destroyed, its models of governance heavily influenced first the Neo-Babylonian Empire and then the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Monthly tribute collection and proper bureaucratic control were pioneered by the Assyrians. One of the most important Assyrian innovations was the infrastructure that kept the empire connected, a precursor to the later royal road of the Persian Empire, which relied on relay stations, road networks, and fast messengers to maintain cohesion. Even the famous title King of Kings, which was used by the Iranian emperors, was adopted by the Assyrians, with the Ninurta being the first to use it. Assyrian influence also extended into the realm of art and imperial image-making. As previously mentioned, Assyrian art was not merely decorative, it functioned as political theatre, projecting authority and shaping the very concept of kingship. The Persian kings adopted this powerful visual language. While the Achaemenids created their own artistic style, it drew heavily from Babylonian, Assyrian, and Elamite traditions. Even the Faravahar, a central symbol in Zoroastrianism and ancient Iranian iconography, bears a striking resemblance to the Assyrian sun disk. In the West, two figures from Assyrian history became legendary. The first was Queen Shamuramat, a powerful woman that lived during the age of Magnates, who was later mythologized as Semiramis. The second was King Ashurbanipal, who came to be known in legend as Sardanapalus. Their tales were told by Greek historians, Roman playwrights, Renaissance painters, and Romantic poets. Semiramis was portrayed as a seductive queen and a powerful ruler. Sardanapalus, on the other hand, was portrayed as a decadent monarch, supposedly the last ruler of the empire, whose obsession with luxury and leisure led to its downfall. The Assyrians also had a great influence on the Levant. When the kingdoms of Israel and Judah came under Assyrian control, they encountered an imperial ideology that portrayed the Assyrian king as a divinely chosen ruler, one who acted on behalf of the gods, imposed cosmic order, and held authority over all nations. In response, Jewish thinkers began to reimagine their own god, not as a deity bound to a specific land, but as a universal sovereign who reigned supreme over all nations and lands. After the fall of Nineveh in 612 BC and the collapse of the empire, the Assyrian people did not disappear. Many of them remained in northern Mesopotamia, while others migrated to Babylonia. By the early centuries AD, they had adopted Christianity, becoming some of its earliest followers and forming what would become the Church of the East. They became part of the shifting empires that ruled the region: Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, and Islamic caliphates, while preserving elements of their language, culture, and identity. Today, modern Assyrians constitute a distinct ethnic and linguistic community. They speak Neo-Aramaic, a contemporary form of the language that once served as a lingua franca across the Assyrian Empire, which still preserves many words from Akkadian and Old Assyrian.